Today marks the second anniversary of a war that has reshaped our world. According to official figures, more than 70,000 Palestinians have been killed and up to 500,000 wounded. The true toll may be overwhelmingly higher, with as many as 600,000 dead and more than 1 million injured since the war began. After the Al-Ahli massacre on October 17, 2023, he stood before international media and declared, "This is no longer a war."
What happened today is a war crime, and if the Israelis get away with it again, then more war crimes will be committed and more hospitals will be targeted.
This is genocide.
I got into Gaza on the 9th of October. 2 hours after we went through Rafah border, the Israelis bombed the border itself. Shifa had already been full. Children were being taken out of from underneath the rubble, and realizing that this war is very different because it was a war on children.
Gaza's healers, the doctors, nurses and paramedics who should have been saving lives, have themselves been systematically targeted. Figures from around July this year show that since October 2023, at least 1,580 medical personnel have been killed.
These doctors are tracked. This was not collateral damage. This was a systematic killing of staff and destruction of the buildings. Killing is the political aim of this war. The genocide in Gaza is a harbinger of wars to come in the 21st century.
Today marks the second anniversary of a war that has reshaped our world. It began on October 7, 2023, when Hamas fighters launched a deadly attack on Israel, killing around 1,200 soldiers and civilians. The following day, Israel's massive retaliation set in motion a war of staggering and disproportionate scale and destruction. According to official figures, more than 70,000 Palestinians have been killed and up to 500,000 wounded. Yet, more recent figures provided by independent and credible military and intelligence sources suggests the true toll may be overwhelmingly higher, with as many as 600,000 dead and more than 1 million injured since the war began. If accurate, these numbers represent more than 2/3 of the entire population of the Gaza Strip being either eliminated or seriously wounded. If this is not genocide, a war crime, an attempt at ethnic cleansing, then what is? What is additionally disturbing is that within those numbers lies a chilling reality. Gaza's healers, the doctors, nurses and paramedics who should have been saving lives, have themselves been systematically targeted. I do not have the most recent figures, but figures from around July this year show that since October 2023, at least 1,580 medical personnel have been killed. That means on average, every 2 days, Israel has killed 5 healthcare workers, 16 per week. If we apply the same calculation since July, the number now should be around 1,724 health workers killed. Among those executed were some of Gaza's most distinguished medical minds, like Dr. Omar Farwana, former Dean of the Faculty of Medicine at the Islamic University of Gaza, Dr. Rafat Lubab, Director of Hamad Hospital for Artificial Limbs, Dr. Soma Baroud, a leading obstetrician gynecologist killed on her way to work, Dr. Ahmad Al-Makdama, a prominent reconstructive surgeon, Dr. Saeed Jude, the last orthopedic surgeon in northern Gaza, also killed on his way to work, Dr. Adnan Al-Bursh, head of orthopedic surgery at Al-Shifa hospital, who died under torture in Israeli detention. Dr. Iyad Rantizi, head of a women's hospital in Beit Lahia, also killed in Israeli custody. As of February 2025, more than 185 doctors and medical staff remain detained in Israeli prisons and camps, including Ghassan Abu-Sittah, director of the Kamal Adwan Hospital, who has been held since December 2024. This is not collateral damage. This is medicide. The deliberate destruction of Gaza's capacity to heal, survive, live. Every murdered doctor represents the loss of decades of training, of expertise that could have saved thousands more lives. Every bombed hospital is the dismantling of Gaza's ability to heal itself and to endure. The World Health Organization has documented 734 attacks on Gaza's medical infrastructure since the war began. Hospitals turned into graveyards, ambulances blown apart, clinics shelled. Of the 36 hospitals that once served Gaza's population, barely 19 are still functioning, most of them only partially, offering little more than basic emergency care. What international law is meant to protect, Israel has deliberately demolished. Gaza's remaining hospitals are overwhelmed and failing. War, injuries, malnutrition, and disease far exceed their capacity, while staff, medicine, power, and equipment are in catastrophic short supply. Rebuilding this shattered system will be a monumental task. Experts estimate it will take at least a decade and more than $15 billion to restore what has been destroyed. A coalition of diaspora medics and global NGOs has already begun drafting recovery plans. But as long as Gaza remains under siege and bombardment, those efforts cannot move beyond paper. In this special episode marking 2 years since the October 7 war, we are joined by Dr. Ghassan Abu-Sittah, one of the witnesses to this systematic assault. Dr. Abu-Sittah is a British-Palestinian plastic and reconstructive surgeon who entered Gaza just 2 days into the war with Médecins Sans Frontières. For 43 days, he operated in besieged hospitals, from Al-Shifa to Al-Ahli to Al-Wada, bearing witness to the carnage and raising the alarm to the world. After the Al-Ahli massacre on October 17, 2023, he stood before international media and declared, "This is no longer a war. This is genocide." 2 years later, his warnings have been borne out in full, with the recent UN Human Rights Commission report declaring the war a genocide. And today, on the second anniversary, we ask, what happens next? How can Gaza's shattered health system possibly recover? And what must the world do to break this cycle of destruction? Welcome, Dr. Ghassan Abu-Sittah. It's my great privilege and honor to be sitting with you today. Thank you for giving us your time. Very much. It's incredibly valuable. I know that all the work that you do, but today we want to share with the rest of the world your opinion, your story, and your feelings for what lies ahead for the Palestinians and the world. We're in a very precarious situation. Thank you. Let me start by the day you entered Gaza and what you saw, those 43 days that you worked in a besieged hospital or hospitals. What was the scene like that greeted you when you first arrived at the hospital, when you first saw Gaza?
So I got into Gaza on the 9th of October. 2 hours after we went through Rafah border, the Israelis bombed the border itself. I wasn't able to make it to Shifa Hospital that day because we were pinned down. The night of the 9th, there were 350 air raids in the neighborhood that I was staying in my family home. And so it wasn't until Tuesday morning that I managed to walk to the hospital.
How long a walk is that?
The problem wasn't the problem was that street was already filled with these 10-meter craters. And so you would have to walk around the rims of the carrying my luggage. When I arrived at the hospital on the 10th, Shifa had already been full.
In 2 days.
In 2 days. There was no empty beds. We were starting to feel that this was, in terms of scale, something that was worse than the 2014 war. And as a result of the 16 years of siege, even early on, there were shortages of the material, of medication, but soon the scale of the attack, the ferocity was evident. I made my way, I remember going to the burns unit, and then within minutes being called back to the emergency department, and just waves of ambulances bringing 5 or 6 wounded in each ambulance.
Which
and-
normally carry 2 people.
Best. And then spending the night operating on children. Children being taken out of from underneath the rubble, and realizing that this war is very different because it was a war on children.
You knew that from day. I mean, you've done of any, as you said, wars.
The first night, I think I must have operated on around 8, and they were all children. And they were all taken from underneath the rubble, one of whom was the daughter of an obstetrician who worked at Shifa, who was killed herself with her other child. One was a boy whose face was very badly injured. We were already seeing amputations. It was the use of these massive bombs on these residential buildings. And then it was 43 continuous days. I mean, I would move from Shifa to Al-Ahli, from Al-Ahli to Al-Awda in an ambulance. I hadn't been able to kind of leave the system just because of the ferocity of the bombing.
How did it feel for you as a trained doctor, seeing your own colleagues being targeted? How did it feel that the hospitals were being targeted? Because you were there too when there was significant attacks against hospitals.
So the first time was our colleague, Dr. Midhat Saydam, was with us in the plastic surgery department. This was in October. And he had we were very busy, and his sister and her kids came to the department. They were trying to escape their neighborhood, which was being bombed. He said that he was just going to take them to his home, get them settled, and then come back. And he went, and he didn't come back. And I remember we were just thinking he probably just got tired. We'd been working flat out. And then that night we discovered that his house had been bombed. And then a few days later, Dr. Hammam al-Loh, who I had met in Shifa during this visit, he was killed in a similar way within half an hour of getting to his house. And then there was the attack on Al-Ahli Baptist Hospital, where they fired a missile into the hospital court. And I realized that unlike previous wars, the Israelis considered the hospital as the battlefield. And so this was not collateral damage. This was a systematic killing of staff and destruction of the buildings.
Because, like you mentioned a couple there, it wasn't purely by accident that their homes were attacked.
There was an AI, and I mean, now we know that there's an AI algorithm that tracks their phones to their homes, and within half an hour, their homes are targeted. And now we're up to 1,600 health workers who have been killed in that way. A couple of days ago, the Israelis killed an endocrinologist who was still in the north. Every few days, there's an intentional targeted killing of a doctor.
So just explain that to us. So they're not just happening to be at the wrong place at the wrong time.
No, these doctors are tracked. And then once they get to their home, they're targeted with their family.
And are they tracked, you said by their phones, but if they got rid of their phones, could they be...
And that's what people started to do. Then they started to get rid of their phones. But they were still being targeted. The ambulance men were still being targeted. And within a 3-week period back in April of this summer, Israel killed 10 intensive care nurses in different places. I mean, they're likely. So now we are at the, and you realize this is not just part of the Rana killing, that before the war, the health professionals constituted 0.8% of the population.
Mm.
They now constitute 9% of those killed by Israel.
Wow. Massively disproportionate.
Being a journalist and being the health professional in Gaza were dangerous
Professions. If you didn't leave, you would have most likely been killed or ended up being taken by the IDF and tortured, as many of your colleagues, Al-Ahli, have been and remain in custody. Do you ever think about that and think about what could have happened to you and, what that would have meant for the cause?
2 days after I left Al-Ahli hospital and I made the trip to the south, the Israeli army raided the hospital and arrested all of the surgical and team that was in the operating room that I'd spent my time working with. I think there is no doubt that Israel had decided to silence whomever they felt was trying to tell the story. But at the same time, there's a sense of guilt. You've left behind a place that is full of people that you have worked with, you've admired, you've loved, and there's a sense of guilt every time we hear of another colleague being killed, we hear of another friend being killed. After I left, one of my close friends, Dr. Ahmed Mhanna, who's the medical director of Al-Ahli Hospital, towards the end of December 23, was arrested. He now remains in prison for over 650 days. And then Dr. Muhammad Abeid, who's an orthopedic surgeon, was arrested. And then Dr. Adnan Al-Bursh was arrested and tortured to death. So although you leave, you are constantly reminded of those who you've left behind.
Mm. And the sacrifice that they made.
Absolutely.
What moment in the 43 days that you were there is something that you can't forget? Was there a moment that just remains in your memory?
If you recall the night the Israeli army had that press conference where they showed the diagrams about how Shifa sits on this labyrinth of tunnels and command and control centers. Then at the end of that press conference, the Israelis then turned off all communication with Gaza and then started bombing Shifa Hospital, and bombing it so intensely that the buildings that we were in were shaking. But the work had to continue. We had to try to operate. And I remember just, operating and then every few minutes feeling the building almost jump up. And then in order to carry on, I just took 5 minutes and I went and sat in the corner. And I made peace with this idea that I wasn't going to make it, but I needed to make peace with that idea so that I could carry on my work. Because unless you accept you're dead, you're always worried about dying. And that's that moment I remember sitting, thinking, realizing that this is most likely it, accepting that this is the choice that I've always made in my life, and then being able to kind of go through that door and finishing the operating list. I finished around 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning.
Wow. That's huge. That's an incredible thing to have had to reckon with at that moment, isn't it? Quite emotional. who said Gaza's health system was deliberately targeted. Israel continues to deny it. From your experience and witness, and I know it's probably been said by a million people, but let's get it on the record again. Why do you believe, or how can we prove that Israel is systematically attacking these hospitals and the healthcare workers, and that it's not accidental as they continue to lie to the world about?
So, of the 39 hospitals, we now only have 3. A whole generation of health workers has been wiped out. The destruction of the infrastructure, the blood bank, all of the auxiliary parts of the health system were destroyed. And now, with the famine, what they're doing is destroying people's ability to heal. Malnourished people are unable to, 1, survive injuries, and 2, if they survive them, they're unable to heal. Their bodies are too denuded to be able to make it. And so you've dismantled the healing process from institutions to individuals to down to the cellular level, the ability of the wounded to recover from these injuries. And the siege prevents the entry of any kind of medication and so, every day there's over 300 wounded. There aren't the material for them. There aren't the doctors for them. Israel's now preventing 90% of all applications by doctors to get into Gaza to assist.
I think that speaks volumes. It's very clear. That moment that you stood outside Al-Ahli hospital and made your declaration, said this is no longer a war, this is a genocide. Take us back there to that moment and why you used and felt that those were the most appropriate words, because you called it out, so soon, 10 days after the war began, you called it a genocide. Take us back to that, that what made you feel that you had the conviction to come out in front of international media and declare it was a genocide.
So from the beginning of the war, you would be looking out the window and all of a sudden a neighborhood would turn into a plume of dust and then disappear. So it wasn't that they were targeting buildings. You could just hear 8 or 9 straight huge bombs, these 1-ton bombs and 1.5-ton bombs, land on a single neighborhood, and then the neighborhood would disappear. On the day that I arrived at Al-Ahli, which was the morning of the 17th, the Ahli hospital was full of families who had escaped and thought like everybody else. This is a hospital owned by the World Council of Churches, run by the Anglican Church in England. There is no chance that the Israelis would target it. And so the courtyard of the hospital, and it's a kind of colonial hospital with lots of gardens and large courtyards, was full of these families. The choice of targeting the middle of where these families sat, the use of a fragmentation missile that aims at taking as many lives as possible by turning into like a shrapnel, made me realize that there is no other aim other than killing. Killing is the political aim of this war. There isn't, killing is not a way of exerting pressure. It's a way of annihilation. And it was that moment that I realized that there is no aim to this war other than to kill everybody.
And that's your conclusion. It's a genocide-like
conclusion.
Because using those kind of bombs, how can you be targeting Hamas? How can you be attacking Hamas, if you're using that type of weaponry and in that environment? You're absolutely right. I mean, there's no justification whatsoever because their claim at the time was we're targeting Hamas and, this is a human
And
shield.
Al-Ahli had its own internal security guards. Nobody went in and out of the hospital unless they went through the gate of the hospital. But the choice of the hospital, choosing a hospital called the Baptist Hospital with links, Israel from that moment until the weekend, until the attack on Doha, it insists on trying to explain to everybody that there are no red lines and chooses red lines to cross, to show, to perform that complete omnipotence over the rest of the region and over the lives of people in this region.
It's not only over the region, I think it's globally. They're proving that, right now the focus is the region. But I think the lesson the world is learning is that no one's safe. There are no red lines for Israel, Mossad, and all those that work in this group of Zionism that are safe. Looking at Israel's culpability, says it does not target civilians or hospitals. And based on, you've explained just then in that example, the way that it absolutely does target civilians. Do you believe also that the destruction of Gaza's medical system was a military strategy? You alluded to it, but, the healing, the inability to heal, you alluded to that. And is it also a military strategy to break the population's ability to survive, their will to survive?
If you look at the Israeli tactics of destruction of the health system, destruction of the water and sewage, wiping out the whole of Gaza, 95% of homes have been destroyed, and then continuously forcing the population to move. People now in Gaza, some of them are on their 5th, 6th, 7th time they've been displaced. That continuous movement with that brutalization is part of breaking the will of people so that they either die or they leave.
But can they leave?
It's not that they can leave. The Palestinian people have demonstrated that they are rooted in their country, that they will not leave their country. And that is why, one, we see this genocide continuing for 2 years. But the flip side to that is for 2 years, Israel has been trying to get rid of the Palestinians in Gaza and has failed to get rid of the Palestinians in Gaza.
Well, for 100 years, it's been trying to get rid of the Palestinians, but no more intensely and determinedly than the last 2 years. And they're publicly, unashamedly declaring it and offering, airplanes to ferry them out. That the Palestinians refuse. But, looking at the numbers, and I mentioned in my intro that, the publicly known numbers, the recorded numbers from the Gaza Health Ministry is around 60, 70,000 that have been killed and maybe a couple of 100,000. But they're the numbers that they can prove. But more recently, even medical and intelligence sources are saying the number with this scale of damage is more like 500, 600, maybe even 700,000 people killed and well over 1 million injured. I mean, the reality is we're talking about 2/3 of the population either dead or wounded.
Yes.
That's absurd. If that is an ethnic cleansing and a genocide. But do you believe those numbers, having witnessed it, having been there for those 42 days and watching it for the last 2 years? When I look at the damage, I think it's impossible that it's 70,000 people dead. Impossible.
So the 70,000, the body has to have been brought to a Ministry of Health morgue with an accompanying relative who has their ID
card, they identify the body, and the body is issued a death certificate. It does not include those who are still under the rubble. It does not include those who have been pulverized by these 1-ton and 2-ton bombs. It does not include those who are dying as a result of their illnesses. A few months ago, the Ministry of Health, and I think the WHO, said that 42% of all kidney dialysis patients have died, not because of the bombs, but because of absence of treatment facilities and the inability to access kidney dialysis units. And you take that to diabetics, you take that to heart disease, you take that to all of the other disease. Then you look at the malnutrition, but the malnutrition functions like an iceberg. You see those kids dying of malnourishment, but the rest of the iceberg are those who are malnourished, not as acutely, but also very malnourished, and then get wounded. And so they can't survive both the malnutrition and the wounding, or are malnourished and then get one of the infectious diseases that are there because of the destruction of the environment, or get all three. And that triad means that you die at a lesser injury because these factors are working synergistically.
So the reality is that the numbers have to be higher. Mm.
And to give you an idea of the scale, as a result of the Second World War, France lost 4% of its population. So this gives you an idea of the only thing that is off scale is the Armenian genocide.
We're talking, 2% of the population. And those are the numbers that need to be published, that need to be presented and repeated, because this 70,000 is deluding people. It's deluding people into
But I think people have figured out that even without expertise, that this can't be 70,000. That all of these images of these, that Gaza completely decimated will not produce 60,000-70,000.
No. I mean, the numbers for the Ukraine war, it was astonishing to listen and to actually recognize the numbers, because they don't promote it as much either in the media. But we're talking about, 500,000 dead in Ukraine at least. That was last year. I haven't even.
But of those 500,000, only 2% are children.
Yeah.
Whereas in Gaza, 45% of those killed are children.
The big difference.
Absolutely. Because Ukraine is a war between two armies.
Yes.
And Gaza is a genocide between an army and a population.
Yes, exactly. And that's the distinction. Although Israel and America would like us to believe that it's against two equal players, it's far from. We're talking about a ragtag group of militia who happen to have some missiles and some guns, which they've probably been rearming themselves from Israeli troops that they overcome. But we're not talking about an equal army or an equal battle.
And the aim was never Hamas. The aim was the population.
Exactly.
The aim was to affect demographic change.
Given the excuse.
Absolutely.
To fulfill their plan of annexing Gaza, annexing the West Bank, and expanding into South Lebanon. Absolutely. That's right. And Syria.
Absolutely.
Yeah. As they say, and we've heard it, if we look back in history to the interviews that Netanyahu has given, this plan was back in the late 80s, early 90s, in the interviews he's given.
It was, so in 82, part of the agreement between Reagan and Begin was that the Americans accepted Israeli occupation until the Al-Ahli River. So it's obvious, and the Al-Ahli River is the border that Weizmann, the first president of Israel, wanted for Israel. So it's obvious that that this is an ideologically motivated government with an ideologically motivated plan. The only thing that has changed is that the Israelis now no longer want a population in that area. They want to clear South Lebanon, they want to clear Gaza, they want to clear the West Bank, they want to clear the Golan Heights.
And that's why they've destroyed those villages in South Lebanon, detonated them as they've done.
And over the weekend, they targeted now. So they've been targeting anybody trying to rebuild their house. Now they're targeting families returning for the weekend as a message that you don't even come back for the weekend.
And I know I've done just recent interviews with both the Member of Parliament for Hezbollah and also the Deputy Prime Minister of Lebanon on the issue of disarmament, on the issue of holding Israel accountable to the ceasefire. And there's a massive issue within Lebanon as to how they proceed. But we want to stay on Palestine right now and not take the conversation into Lebanon. Let me go to international justice and the responsibility of the world. In 2024, you traveled to The Hague and you sat with and gave a briefing to the ICC investigators about the evidence that you witnessed. Can you share with us what some of that evidence was and how did they respond to it? And do you think that it might lead to justice?
So it was over 5 days, a full 5 days, in which I gave a witness testimony from the 9th of October for the 43 days, from the types of injuries, the killing, the targeting of the health facilities, the targeting of the blood bank so that we wouldn't get any blood to the patients. And all of this was taken down as an affidavit. What has been so disturbing is the methodical way in which the people who work in the ICC have been targeted by the American administration. Their bank accounts have all been frozen. They're prevented from traveling. Really, they have come after all of them in a way that is the only way you can describe it is something out of a mafiosi film, where they threaten the judge and they threaten the public prosecutor and they threaten their families.
This is the power that has been, given to America by its people, not holding its own government accountable, and it's witnessed all over the world, even Australia, where I'm from. It's a similar scenario, although our politics is not as hijacked as the American system is, and we still have some, window of independence, but we can definitely see how completely overtaken, captive American politics is on both sides. And it's not surprising that they're doing that to the ICC investigators. But how was the response by the investigators to what you said? And you're not the only one, obviously, that they interviewed. They were doing this in order to, I guess they're building evidence, but also to issue the arrest warrants that were given last year, in September, I believe, in 2024, against Netanyahu, Yoav Gallant, and also the Hamas fighters. But there were many other doctors. Do you know?
So at that time, I had been the first one to come out, but they had also interviewed some of the wounded that had come out. And so they had been building a case. And I think the case is so overwhelming. There's now such a mountain of evidence that there's no doubt. And that's why the Americans have decided that you tear the whole thing down.
Yeah. And no doubt, you said there's no doubt that Israel is committing war crimes or crimes against humanity.
But Israeli leaders have said, they have verbalized. I mean, the Israelis are so completely drunk with their sense of impunity that what they articulate, the genocidal will they articulate, in itself is a war crime. The Israelis have been very open about what they want to achieve, who they want to kill, how they view the Palestinians. All of this is on record. It's not conjecture.
No. And that just shocks you even more that even with their open, unashamed brandishing of their goals, countries around the world are still not imposing sanctions. And I'll get into the decisions, but recent decisions to recognize Palestine. Just one question before we jump to that is, how did the Israeli-aligned lobby groups or authorities respond, and how have they responded to your advocacy? And can you talk about any persecution or harassment that's you've been facing throughout since your departure from Gaza?
So I've had 8 cases against me. That's just in the UK. When I was elected rector of Glasgow University, there were 3 cases that were raised. Then a further one with the Scottish Department of Education, and then one with the Charity Commission in the UK to have me banned from holding office in any charity. And then 2 cases against me with the General Medical Council to have my license withdrawn. One was thrown out. The second one is still pending. Then there was the case in Germany to have me barred from entering Germany. And then the German government then had me barred from entering Schengen.
The whole of the Schengen?
The whole of the Schengen area. And when we won that case, and then recently a Berlin court ruled that the ban was illegal, the German government has now decided to contest that ruling in appeal. So it continues, but at the same time, you tell yourself, this is nothing compared to what they're doing to our people, to my colleagues.
But do you think, just looking at the German government and looking at the narrative, they have shifted. They have shifted from where it was, but still, how do they have the gall to stop you? Why are they taking such strong legal action? Do you think it's because of the pressure being imposed upon them by their Zionist backers?
So what we have is a decision by the German government to be completely enrolled in this genocide. The German government increased arms sales tenfold when the war started. The German government has whole budgets that even the German parliament is unable and not allowed to investigate, of aid to Israel. And that kind of obsessive need to be part of the genocide in terms of German history. Germans have genocide envy. Germany's history is not just in terms of the Holocaust, in terms of the genocide in Namibia, in terms of the continuation of that current within German society. We cannot put it down purely to German government decisions.
Looking at the world and its complicity, the UN, the ICC, and the World Health Organization have documented hundreds of attacks on healthcare in Gaza. Let's go back to this core topic. Yet the international community has continued to has failed to stop them. In your opinion, has our global system failed completely, or has it's obviously failed Gaza? Is our global system failing? Is it before our eyes? Are we witnessing the destruction of this rules-based order?
So after the Second World War, the myth of the European liberal state was based on liberalism, was based on rule of law, was based on international law. Whether it was violated, whether it was hypocritical from the beginning, there was a toolbox for the way states conducted themselves. Whether they violated that or not, still remained the standard by which they were measured. In their effort to support the genocide, to protect the genocidal project, and to ensure that we're entering into the third year of genocide, Europe has decided to sacrifice all of these tools. Without a doubt, the question that is being asked is, how do you conduct foreign policy after Gaza, having destroyed all of the norms and the institutions by which foreign policy was conducted?
It's a very good question. Has anyone got an answer for that?
Absolutely not. I mean, they must expect that somehow at the end of this, it will not matter. And that what is critical is that Israel is victorious in its genocidal.
And they can make excuses.
Well, what has happened is we've seen how the genocide has become a vehicle for the return of the fascist right in the United States, in Europe, which is anti-humanist, which is anti-liberal order. And that's what has happened when you've destroyed these rules and these institutions. What you've signaled, and you've conducted a performative, brutal genocide. You have allowed ideologies that are intrinsically anti-humanist to flourish and to get the credibility that they've been seeking, and to leave the margins and go into the mainstream.
And that's exactly what we've
And that's what we've seen.
Do you think they realize that? Do they not see that happening on their own streets? Do they not? Or is there a intentional like acceptance, and are they part of this crazy, messianic,
Well, there's no
world order?
as Special Rapporteur Albanese said, Gaza is a crime scene with everybody's fingerprints on it. There is no doubt that the money that has been made in the genocide is colossal. The arms sales, the way aid to Israel, military aid to Israel, is a way by which you siphon taxpayers' money from the public purse into the arms industry, and then you burn it, and then you siphon some more and you burn it. And that all of these arms industries have had literally a killing in terms of profit. There is no doubt that the politicians are beholden to a system, an imperialist system, that sees Israel as the tip of the spear, and that subduing the populations of the East Mediterranean is a critical component of preparing for the war against China.
Interesting. But let's go back to the point you made about the money. If you follow the money, and everyone keeps saying follow the money, and it's all coming out of our taxpayer dollars, and we're waking up to that. I mean, the American population, the whole world, civilians are waking up to the fact that their dollars are going to fund a genocide, and someone's getting extremely, extremely rich out of it. Well, the same few, because they fund the wars, they create the wars, and they make money out of the wars. It's taken a long time for the vast majority of the population of the world to wake up to this, but this has been, in a way, if any good has come out of, God forbid, Gaza, it's the awakening of humanity to the reality of their leaders, of our leaders. Don't you think the people, and I've seen it, look at Italy a couple of days ago, the whole of Italy was on strike. The Spanish, Australians a few weeks ago, and there's another demonstration, hundreds of thousands of people. In America, there's demonstrations all the time. And public opinion is forcing governments to shift. But are they shifting enough? But my point is, are we going to let them get away with it? Are the people going to allow them to get away with making money, stealing our money, and to enrich their purses and create havoc and destruction. This is like, I'm getting philosophical with, but it's like, and I'm a religious person, but how can I not be? Because this is, if you look at it, no matter what way you look at it, it's devilish. It's destroying humanity. It's destroying our morals, our values, and it's making us all centered on money is right. I don't know how. I mean, that is a
So this is all happening in the midst of austerity policies.
yes.
So while funding the genocide, the British government passes the biggest crackdown on welfare to people with disabilities in the history of the United Kingdom, devastating people's lives. Cutbacks in health services, in education across Europe, across the United States, while that money is being channeled to a genocidal war so that it can continue the military industrial machine. And I think that's one of the things that people are waking up to. And that's why uh, the fascist racist right returns, is that these political elites now need a diversion from, and you create the diversion by coming back to an anti-immigrant xenophobic agenda, so that people are not looking at where the money is going. So you tell them that this immigrant who came on a boat is why your kids don't have a decent school, not because $4 or $5 billion have gone in the last year to Israel just to maintain the killing.
And when Trump came in, he forced the whole world, or the major trade partners, to increase their defense budgets. And like you said, even in Australia, even in Canada, and the rest of the world, the budgets and the cuts in public spending, public TV, but also public services, has been astounding. And yet, this all makes sense. I mean, if you mapped it out, you could understand and just traced it back to the center, which is this military weapon industry and the financial centers of the world. Just going to the decisions and the announcement made this week at the United Nations, with many countries, including France, the UK, Canada, Australia, recognizing the state of Palestine, which was a wonderful, acknowledgement. I mean, in saying wonderful, meaning it in the, finally you've, known and decided to do something that should have done decades ago. And so I want to ask you, is it important that the recognition of the state of Palestine, is it important to liberating Palestine? And if not, immediately in the near future, was that step necessary, or is it all theatrics and symbolism?
When faced with the choice between sanctions that would effectively force the Israelis to stop the genocide and performative recognition, Western governments opted for performative recognition. Now, that doesn't mean that recognition itself isn't a victory for Palestinians and those who support them, but it is a victory in terms of showing how public mobilization that has happened against the genocide is destabilizing these governments enough to feel the need to have a policy that at least responds to public outrage. And that's why I think now is the time to double up on the mobilization, the demonstrations, the encampments in campuses, in order to go the next step. And the next step has to be sanctions. That's what will stop the genocide. That's what will stop the slaughter.
Well, we saw a lot of, heads of state speaking out very strongly. I was very impressed with the Indonesian president who offered 20,000 troops to take into to defend Gaza. I mean, that's the first time that someone's offered troops because people were saying, who's going to put forward troops? The Slovenian president was outstanding. The Colombian president was incredible and very strong.
The Colombian president really understood it from the very beginning
He
of
did.
this war, that this is a war that's not just aimed at Palestinians, but it aimed at people in the global south to send a message that if you stand up to hegemony and Western interests, this is what will be done to you.
That's right. I mean, I'm very, very impressed with him. Obviously, he's not caught in that group. We're running out of time, so I'm going to get to the last questions. What would you say to your fellow doctors around the world who have stayed silent during this genocide?
This genocide constitutes a complete shift in military doctrine. In the 50s and 60s, when the doctrine of scorched earth was first coined, it was based on the idea that the majority of the world's population live in rural areas, and therefore our idea of scorched earth, whether it was in Korea or Vietnam, revolved around the burning of large swathes of agricultural land and of forests. With the world's population now mainly living in urban centers, scorched earth policy means the destruction of the health system. Because the aim of scorched earth is to make sure that nothing grows, people are unable to live. And now, in this day and age, in the 21st century, that means you take out and dismantle the health system. And so, what they need to understand is that Gaza is the beginning of wars to come, in which the health system, the hospitals are the battlefield, where what has been learned from the war and the genocide in Gaza will be taught in military academies to be replicated in every war.
What can they do?
I think unless the genocide and the genocidal logic is defeated in Gaza, the rest of the century will be a century of genocidal wars.
That's a grim outlook, but I can understand how you can come to that conclusion and why it is so important that we don't give up and we double down and continue so strongly. And for doctors across the world and nurses and medical workers to speak up, as well as journalists. And I know there's some journalists, but a lot more should be done. Looking at the future, despite the devastation, there are efforts underway to rebuild Gaza's medical infrastructure. But is it even possible to consider rebuilding Gaza? I mean, people have put forward plans, but they're based on paper. And are they doing it for themselves, to appease themselves, or is there a real possibility of Gaza being rebuilt?
The Palestinian people will rebuild Gaza. The Palestinian people built the Gulf in the 50s. The Palestinian people built major parts of the Lebanese economy. The Palestinian people have always been builders. And the Palestinian people are able to rise up again when this genocide is ended, as we have after 48. And we will continue our struggle that has lasted over 100 years against this ideology that aims to wipe us out. Our struggle against Zionism will continue.
How do you keep going? How do you keep going and remain motivated and determined to keep advocating? What drives you?
That those who are there fighting the real fight do not have the luxury of me giving up. There are times when you are so despondent that you do think this is futile. but you think that, that's a call that they have to make. They don't have that luxury for you to feel despondent.
Finally, if you had the world's attention right now, what would your single most urgent message be?
The genocide in Gaza is a harbinger of wars to come in the 21st century. Unless the logic of genocide is defeated in Gaza, we will see it everywhere.
So be warned.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your time today. It's been a great honor and emotive conversation, but necessary. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Real Talk and experiencing firsthand the real stories told by real people. I hope you found value and meaning and encourage you to subscribe to my YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. Your ongoing financial support is vital to our ability to continue delivering these stories, so please remember to click on the donate button in the description, giving only what you can afford. I spent my whole life giving my time, money and skill to serve human rights and social justice causes, and I know it's not easy to keep giving selflessly. But this work is important because the mainstream media has failed to live up to their obligations. So we need to step up, speak up, or we're no better than them. I believe by tuning in to this podcast, you are someone who wants to know the facts and the truth, so you can independently decide what to believe and what not to. My job is to deliver that information. Yours is to place a value on it. Whatever you decide is humbly welcome. Thanks again, and see you on the next episode of Real Talk.